Okay, and now I would like to turn us over to today's speaker, Maddie. Please welcome her. Woo!
Hello, everyone. I'm Maddie. I'm the ministry assistant here at the River. If you have questions about why it is that you're receiving 2 emails, I'm the person to talk to. I can make that stop. There's a very complicated reason for that, but it's a good one, I promise you, if you give me time to explain it. It is so good to see everyone here this morning. How are we doing? Sunday after Easter? Yeah? Okay. All right. We're in a weird place here because we are actually in between sermon series. So we're off-roading today. We're going to be, we're doing a sermon that's outside of any sermon series, but it's on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Today I want to talk about a moment that I think comes up for each of us with some frequency, and it's a moment when we are caught in the middle and want to do the right thing. So what do I mean by that? I think a lot of us have some version of this moment. You see something happening, and you know at least on some level that it's not right. Maybe it's at work, someone is being overlooked or treated differently, or quietly carrying more than they should. Or maybe it's in a friend group, something gets said or done and it lands wrong, but everyone kind of just moves on and pretends it didn't happen. Maybe it's in a relationship you're in. You can feel like something isn't healthy or fair or honest, but naming it would change things. These are the moments where we're caught in the middle. We're caught between people, between our managers and the people who we manage, or maybe the people who we serve, our customers, or people we serve in general. We are sometimes caught between friends, between family members. We're caught between going along with a person we love and doing what we know is right. But it's not just people. We're often caught in the middle between systems, too. We're caught between buying cheaper stuff that's bad for the environment and manufactured and delivered under unethical conditions, or buying stuff that's really expensive and maybe outside of our price range and slow to get here, right? I think those are some of the caught in the middle choices we have to make a lot as well. I think we find ourselves caught in the middle a lot, actually. At home, at work, at school, and in life. And so today I want to talk about a part of the Bible that's about being caught in the middle. Today I'm going to be talking about the Epistle to Philemon. So what is the Epistle to Philemon? This is one of Paul's letters, and it's a letter that he wrote from prison later in his life after he was arrested in Rome. So this is the end of his career before he is executed in Rome. And it's significant that Paul wrote this letter from prison because Paul started a whole tradition of people writing letters from prison over the centuries for all kinds of just causes. So Martin Luther King Jr., many of you probably know, wrote his famous letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963 on newspaper margins and smuggled scraps of paper, challenging white clergy who called his methods unwise and untimely. That's a very famous one. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's also up there, he penned a profound reflections on the costly grace from Nazi prisons before his execution in 1945, calling Christians to resist evil even unto death. There's Nelson Mandela. He wrote letters from Robben Island for 27 years that inspired the global anti-apartheid movement and prepared him to lead South Africa's transition to democracy. Antonio Gramsci, who some of you might be familiar with, he produced over 3,000 pages of notebooks from fascist prisons in Italy, reimagining how social transformation happens through culture and ideas. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I probably did not get that right, smuggled out writings from Soviet gulags that exposed the brutality of totalitarian systems to the world. And finally, Gandhi, who's also up here, wrote some of his most influential pieces on nonviolent resistance during his imprisonments in South Africa and in India. So there's something about being stripped of freedom that clarifies what freedom actually means and what it costs. I think it's significant that all of these letters were written from prison. So when Paul writes this letter from a prison cell, he's working within that tradition. He's actually arguably starting that tradition, thinking about freedom and what it actually means. So what makes the letter to Philemon different? Unlike a lot of Paul's letters, this letter is not written to a whole church, sort of. It's really directed primarily at one person. We'll go over that later. There's a nuance to that, but really it's directed at one specific person. It's directed to a man named Philemon. So who is Philemon? Philemon is a leader in the early church. He hosts a church in his home. So he hosts like a house church. And Philemon is someone who Paul knows very well. This is someone Paul respects. He's a good friend. And the reason that Paul is writing this letter to Philemon is because of a third person. Paul is writing to Philemon because of a man named Onesimus. So who is Onesimus? Onesimus is a slave. Onesimus is someone who had been enslaved by Philemon, but at some point, Onesimus left Philemon. We don't know exactly what happened, whether he ran away, whether there was some kind of conflict, but he ends up crossing paths with Paul while Paul is in prison. They become friends. So in this prison where Paul is, Paul becomes close with this escaped fugitive slave, Onesimus, who belonged to his friend Philemon. Complicated situation. So, and while Onesimus is with Paul in prison, something changes. Onesimus becomes a Christian, one, and Paul comes to care deeply about him. He even calls him my child. So now Paul finds himself in this complicated situation. He's now basically family with the slave of his friend Philemon. And that's complicated for a few reasons. So first, it's complicated because of the power dynamics. Philemon is not just Paul's friend. He is Onesimus' enslaver. He has real authority over him, legal, social, economic. He theoretically has total control of Onesimus' life. And because Onesimus has escaped from Philemon, he is now technically, in the eyes of the law, a criminal. So escaping from your master was a crime that could be punished harshly, sometimes with beatings or branding, and in extreme cases, even death, depending on the situation and the enslaver. So this isn't a small risk that Onesimus has taken. He's broken the law and could face devastating consequences. He is on the run. And by taking Onesimus in, Paul is now also involved in something that has those serious consequences. He's effectively now kind of complicit in this criminal activity in a way. So that's the first reason why this is complicated. There are some complicated power dynamics involved. Second, it's complicated because this isn't just any crime that Paul is now complicit in. Philemon is actually Paul's friend, as we said. He is someone Paul loves, someone he's worked alongside, someone who he believes in, somebody who he feels this kind of social obligation to. But Onesimus is also somebody who Paul loves too, someone he feels responsible for, someone who he now sees as family. And because of that, Paul sees something. Because Paul now sees that Onesimus as family, Paul can now see that there's something not really right about this situation. The way that he talks about Onesimus as a brother, as family, as someone who should be welcomed just like him, starts to push up against the idea that Onesimus could still be treated as property. Paul doesn't see him as a slave, even though legally that is what he is. So that's the second reason why it's complicated. The third reason it's complicated is because to Paul, there wasn't an obvious, clean solution to this situation. It's obvious to us now that you shouldn't own or enslave people in the first place, but in the social context of this time, it was not obvious to Paul what he should actually do about it, especially within the context of this specific situation. But he had a few options, right? He could have stayed out of it and not gotten involved. He could have sent Onesimus on his way. Onesimus would have continued to be on the run, and who knows what would have happened. Or Paul could have kept Onesimus with him, continued to kind of harbor him as a fugitive. He actually says this in the letter. He says he would have been glad to keep Onesimus with him. He could have protected Onesimus, kept him close, avoided sending him back into a situation that could be dangerous. But that would have meant acting without Philemon's knowledge. It would have meant taking control of the situation, deciding the outcome himself, and concealing what was happening from his friend. Or Paul could have tried to force a different outcome. He has the authority here. We'll see this later. He says it in the letter. He says he could actually command Philemon to do what is required. He could have told Philemon what to do. He could have said, this is wrong, you need to free him, and expected Philemon to listen to him and obey him. But Paul actually doesn't do any of those things. He doesn't stay out of it, he doesn't avoid it, and he doesn't control it. Instead, he writes this letter, this epistle to his friend Philemon. He writes a letter where he tries to persuade his friend to welcome Onesimus back, take Onesimus in, this time as a friend rather than as a slave. And I don't think that we should pretend that Paul is a person who has all the right answers. Maybe writing a letter to persuade Philemon to take Onesimus back as a friend was not the right call. Maybe he should have lied and kept hiding Onesimus with him. Maybe he should have written a letter using his authority to demand that Philemon free Onesimus. But he didn't do those things. So what do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that Paul sent this slave, who he called his child, back to his enslaver and wrote a letter to that enslaver saying, please welcome him back as you would welcome me? Well, there are actually a number of Black biblical scholars who have wrestled with that exact question. What do we do with this really complicated text about slavery? So a few of them got together and actually wrote a book called Onesimus, Our Brother, that is all about this letter. And one thing that the authors of this book point out is that this letter is really about a slave and his situation. It's really about Onesimus, right? But we don't actually hear from Onesimus at all in this letter. We just hear from Paul. This is Paul's letter. We don't know what Onesimus was thinking about the situation, how he was thinking about it, what he wanted. Was he tired of being on the run? Did he want to go back? Did he want to stay with Paul? Did he want Paul to step up and compel Philemon to free him? We don't know. But what we do know is that going back to Philemon, as Paul seems to suggest he's going to do, comes with a lot of risks. If Onesimus goes back, Philemon could subject him to extremely harsh consequences under the law. And even if he doesn't do that, he could continue legally to treat Onesimus as his slave. He doesn't have to welcome Onesimus back as he would welcome Paul. He doesn't have to do what Paul's asking him to do because, as Paul says, he's not forcing him to do anything. He's just asking nicely. So we don't hear from Onesimus at all in this letter, but we know that what he's about to do is either incredibly brave or incredibly unwise, probably both. And we don't know how much choice he felt he actually had in the matter. So we know that Paul was caught in the middle of his friend and his new family member, but Onesimus was actually caught in the middle too, between this man who he now considered his family, who now considered him his family, and his owner who had complete authority over him. Caught between a life on the run and a life where he goes back to his owner. It's a very different kind of being caught in the middle, fewer choices, much less power than Paul had. When we are caught in the middle, most of the time we are like Paul, right? We're people who with influence, even if it might not feel like it all of the time, most of the time. I think we often have influence in situations where it might not seem like we do. We have social power, we have professional power, financial power, political power. It might not seem like a lot. It might seem like, well, who cares what I say in this social situation or in this meeting? What difference do my small consumer purchases make? What difference does my one vote make? It doesn't feel like you have a lot of power. But you do. We all do. Those things matter. And I look at Paul and I think, wow, he did have so much power, and he still does. We're still reading these letters that he wrote as sacred texts. And in some ways, Paul understands that. He understands his own power. He tells Philemon, I could command you to treat Onesimus with respect if I wanted to. I have that power. But in some ways, he probably doesn't feel like he has power, right? After all, he's writing a letter from prison. He's been arrested and imprisoned by the Romans. He's facing the reality that he's probably going to be executed at some point. That's how his life will end. Sure, he's a leader, but he's a leader in a movement that's facing all kinds of persecution and questions and challenges from all sides. We look at Paul and think, wow, what a powerful guy, but did he know that? Did he know we'd be reading this letter today, parsing through it, trying to find meaning in it? Did he understand the power of his words, or did he think this was just a letter to an old friend? Oftentimes, when we are caught in the middle, we are like Paul, aware of some of our power, but not all of it. And we're trying to do what we think is right, but we're often failing. Paul looked at his options, weighed them against each other, and said, in this case, I think the best I can do is send this person I love back to his owner, along with a letter begging that owner to free him. Was that actually the best that he could do? I don't know. But I think when we're caught in the middle, we're also making all kinds of decisions about how to use our power that might not be the right call. We fail to speak up when we witness wrongdoing or injustice. Maybe it's something that happens in the workplace or a friend making an insensitive comment. We may feel uncomfortable rocking the boat or worry about the personal consequences of challenging the status quo. So we stay silent, convincing ourselves it's not our place to get involved. I know that I am certainly guilty of this in all kinds of situations. We buy cheap clothing or electronics that are produced unethically with exploitative labor practices because it's convenient and affordable. We hesitate to directly confront family members who are behaving harmfully out of fear of jeopardizing the relationship. Or we may enable problematic dynamics because intervening would be uncomfortable or inconvenient for us. Our desire to keep the peace can come at the expense of doing what's right. Like Paul, we are imperfect people wielding our power in questionable ways, ways that hurt people, ways that uphold harmful systems. So then, what is it exactly that we can take from this letter? Does it actually hold any lessons for us today? What do we do with it? I think for all of its flaws, Paul's letter to Philemon is an example of someone trying to use his influence with a friend to measurably improve the life of someone he cares for deeply. And so I want to take us through how he does that and what we actually might be able to take from that, while still acknowledging that this might not have been the best he could do, right? So to start, Paul starts by establishing his authority. He kicks off this letter by establishing his authority in relationship to Philemon. He identifies himself as a prisoner of Christ Jesus, appealing to his status as an apostle writing from prison. He's saying, look, man, I'm in prison. Help me out here. So that's the posture of this letter. He then addresses Philemon with affection, calling him a beloved fellow worker, highlighting their close friendship and shared ministry. So he's playing the friend card. He's appealing to their existing relationship. However, Paul quickly shifts the focus of the letter to Onesimus, saying that he has been converted and is now essentially his child, someone who Paul has spiritual responsibility for. So he's making clear exactly how much this person means to him. And he tells Philemon, listen, I could command you to treat him well, but instead I'm going to appeal to you on the basis of love because I believe in your heart of hearts that you want to do the right thing. Have you ever used that tactic with somebody? Have you ever done that? It's one of my favorite actual advocacy strategies, telling someone, I know you want to do the right thing, and I know that you are going to try to do the right thing because you care. I found that actually works more often than you would think. It's pretty effective. So then he refers to Onesimus as no longer a slave, but more than a slave, our beloved brother, intentionally elevating Onesimus' status from slave to fellow Christian. So from the get-go, he's characterizing Onesimus not as a slave, but as an equal. He's calling him an equal. That's pretty radical for the time. Paul is putting himself out there by doing that. This was a controversial thing to say. And he acknowledges Philemon's likely beef with Onesimus. He recognizes that Onesimus parted from you for a while, likely referring to Onesimus' escape or desertion. He's not avoiding the elephant in the room. He's addressing it. But Paul then makes an emotional appeal, asking Philemon to receive him as you would receive me, blurring the lines between slave and free, master and friend. He's making the ask, and it's a big ask for the time. He's saying, treat this person as an equal if you love me. He even offers to take on any debt or wrongdoing Onesimus has committed, saying, charge that to my account, taking personal responsibility for the situation. So he ends by expressing confidence that Philemon will do even more than I say, leaving room for Philemon to act with generosity and to fully free Onesimus. So what can we take from that? What is Paul doing here that's actually relevant for us? To me, the most important thing that Paul did in this situation was dare to be in an intimate relationship with someone who was from a very different social location from his own, who didn't have really any power. That was rare in Paul's time, and it's rare in our time too. We tend to socially segregate. Our close friends tend to be people who are like us, who come from similar educational backgrounds, similar socioeconomic status, similar race. Studies show that, and a lot of that is actually dictated by zoning, right? We self-segregate into neighborhoods with people who are similar to us, but it also happens in workplaces, right? We segregate by profession, and it happens in how we date and form families too, right? People tend to marry people who are like them. And what does that mean? It means that sometimes we're not even aware of the ways in which we are really caught in the middle, right? We're aware of the ways that we're caught in the middle of coworkers or family members or friends, but we're maybe less directly aware of the ways that we're caught in the middle of systems that have a real impact on people who we are not close with, who we don't see on a daily basis. We don't see the ways in which we're caught in the middle as much every time we vote or make a purchase or go about our daily lives because we're not in close relationship with a lot of people who have a lot less power than we do. And if we were in relationship with those people, it might actually change how we go about our daily lives. It might change our perspective. It might change our priorities. And it seems like it did for Paul, right? Before Paul went to prison, how often was he thinking about runaway slaves? Probably not often, I would guess. But being in prison brought him into close relationship with one, and that relationship changed his life enough that he felt compelled to do something. And it might not be what we would want him to do now, but the one thing I'll say for Paul is that at least he's aware in this case of how caught in the middle of he is. There are real stakes of this situation for Paul. He loves Onesimus like a child, like a brother. This is not some abstract political or economic issue to him. This is about trying to love somebody as best as he could. And if there's anything I think that we can learn from Paul in this letter, I think it's the power that comes with breaking out of our social circles whenever we can and trying to form those real relationships with people who are different from us. It's the power that comes from not being afraid to love someone who might make us feel compelled to live our lives a little bit differently. Because when we do that, when we take a chance in our in-real relationship, become actual friends with people who come from different social locations, that love actually transforms us. It makes us into people who can't help but struggle for collective freedom in all the little ways we can, as imperfect as those ways might be. I used to actually work for a tech company, some of you know, where a lot of my job was managing call centers that were located in El Salvador and the Philippines. So the agents who worked for those places were making, I'm not exactly sure how much, but it was something in the range of like $6 or $7 an hour. And that was a really ethically fraught situation, right? People will tell you, well, these agents, this was probably one of the better jobs that they could get in their context. It's a reputable company that follows labor laws. It comes with good benefits, right? But there's still clearly a massive inequality, right, that I was witnessing there on a daily basis. And there were also all kinds of unfairnesses that I witnessed and was party to all of the time, right? Agents getting blamed for things that really weren't their fault, or the company just expecting them to pick up the slack for all the flaws in what we were selling in ways that really called them to go above and beyond what call center agents would normally be expected to do. And so on a daily basis, I found myself caught in the middle of these call center agents and my management. Management would want me to come down pretty hard on the agents, raise expectations, deliver accountability. And the agents, they were the nicest people. They wouldn't argue, but there was just a reality of what they could and couldn't deliver within the constraints that we had given them. And I don't know that I always made the right call when I was caught in the middle. I don't know that I always did as much as I could do. But I can say, looking back now, that the best thing that I did was try as best I could to form real relationships with as many agents as I could, right? I had a group of them who I would meet with weekly just to hear what was going on, what the challenges were. I'd test out ideas on them, get their feedback, try to understand if what we were doing was working and what we could do better. And oftentimes they actually had some really good ideas about what we could be doing differently. So forming those relationships didn't make me a perfect advocate or someone who always did the right thing, but being friends with the agents, actually being invested in their well-being, made it a lot easier when I went into meetings with management to go to bat for them, right? Because when I was advocating, it wasn't from a place of obligation or trying to live up to a principle. It was from a place of genuinely wanting to make their lives easier because I was actually invested in them as people. And that made it easier, when it was hard in those meetings to actually do the right thing and to push back. Those relationships make it easier. And that did transform me. It made me into a manager who became known for advocating for the agents. I wasn't fixing global inequality, right? Much like Paul, I remained complicit in a harmful system, but I made things a little bit better, I think, and that mattered. And beyond that, it made it easier outside of work in my day-to-day life when I was around whoever, my friends, my family, to lean into discomfort, to lean into relationship, to lean into love, and to say things that needed to be said as lovingly as I could say them. And that's what I think this letter to Philemon really calls us to do. It's saying freedom is no easy thing. If it were, it would already be here, but it clearly isn't. That's not the world that we live in, right? Freedom doesn't happen quickly. But when in doubt, lean into relationships more, especially relationships with people who are different, especially people who come from different social locations. Because once you love people, it's hard not to see their humanity and to be invested in that. And once you see people's humanity, you just generally feel compelled to do something. And doing something is generally better than doing nothing. To me, I think real change starts when we can actually hear Onesimus's voice in this letter. When he becomes our friend, our brother, our child, that is when freedom becomes a real possibility. So how do we begin to do that? I want to end out with 3 practical suggestions. First, I think that there's a practice of attention, right? Paying attention to moments that bother you, that feeling you get when something isn't right. It's easy to gloss over it, but I think it's a practice to not ignore it, right? Don't explain it away. Don't tell yourself it's not a big deal. That discomfort is often the clearest signal that you have that you're caught in the middle of something that matters. And I think that that's a really great place to start. Second, I think say or do something imperfectly. You don't need the perfect words, the perfect plan, the perfect intervention, but you can say something. You can ask a question. You can name what you're seeing. You can say, hey, I don't think that's fair, or that doesn't sit right with me. You can do it in love, right? But I think leverage your relationships, right? Paul doesn't stay silent. He doesn't solve everything either, but he speaks. And that matters. The little things you say, I think, matter a lot. And they do make a difference. And it empowers other people to speak up too. Third, I think build real relationships with people who are different from you. Take those opportunities wherever you can. This is the one I think that changes everything, because when you actually know someone and care about them, these situations stop being abstract. They become really personal. And when something is personal, it's a lot harder to look away. So with that, I want to invite the worship team back up to the stage to let me close us out in prayer as they do that. God, you see the moments we find ourselves in, the moments where something doesn't feel right, where we're caught in the middle, where we don't know what to do. You see the relationships we care about and the tension we feel between loving people and doing what is right. Give us wisdom in those moments. Help us to notice what we would rather ignore. Give us courage to speak even when it's uncomfortable, and teach us how to stay in relationship without losing sight of what matters. God, shape our hearts so that we don't just know what is right, but that we actually love people in a way that compels us to act. Help us to use whatever influence we have, however small it feels, to move things even just a little in a better direction. And when we get it wrong, when we don't say what we should, when we act out of fear or comfort, meet us with grace. Remind us that you are still at work even through imperfect people like us. We trust that you are a God of freedom, a God who sees every person's dignity, and a God who is moving this world towards something better. So use us in whatever small ways we can to be part of that work. Amen.